I will start sharing my screen. So it works. We're good. I'll just have to get rid of the so many windows.
But it looks good what we see, Cătălin.
Okay, so it's a gray big thing, which is good. Now, the title aims to be provocative, and it might actually be a rant, a furious reflection, nevertheless a reflection on what we do and what are the limits of what we do. And of course, I'm going to start by revealing the conclusion, which is that our planning is now way too primitive, and we have to raise it to the level of rocket science if we are ever going to have an impact on poverty areas and deal with housing poverty. I think we're just in a prehistoric age of interventions in poverty, and we're struggling with a basic understanding of what poverty is and what are we able to do as architects and urban planners. But in my exercise, in this reflection exercise, I will go back and forth and try to also base my my reflections on some very concrete examples, not going too much into details, but trying to reveal some of the mechanics of this thing. Rocket science is actually not that, it's not the most advanced science. It's a very advanced form of mechanics. We should tailor our understanding around that sort of thing. So it's a complex thing. It's a really complex thing. It has a lot of mathematics inside it, but it's nothing that is not achievable. There is this funny guy, also tragic because he recently died, who was building rockets that were powered by steam. Of course, they would only fly a few hundred meters. And I say he was a funny guy because his purpose was to demonstrate that the Earth is flat. So he would fly very, very high in order to find the edge of the world. It's of course a California-based individual, and eventually he had an accident. I just hope that architects planning for extreme poverty neighborhoods are not in precisely the same position. Now I just placed on the first page some names of the cities that are connected through this project. I'm very happy and proud to be part of this project that also gives us some fantastic examples from Mumbai. We had Rupali Gupta on the first day, and we had Professor Ikaputra from Yogyakarta 2 days ago. And one of the first things that you can notice is that Asian societies are intrinsically more socially oriented. I would say sometimes in a better way than our societies, especially East Europe, which is the beacon of neoliberalism and the playground of Chicago Boys style interventions. Let's go into it. Oh, no. How should I advance? Oh, it works. We're fine. A quick review of what is going on in Romania. Just very brief. It's about people who were born in a ghetto, then live much of their lives in the socialist blocks of flats that you see in the background. Then they lost their jobs. We had this revolution 30 years ago, and now they came back and their children are born here and they are illiterate and they cannot find any sort of job. The problem in Romania is that this whole range of poverty-stricken Romani communities are a lot of them, could be around 3,000 communities, and that might be 1 million people living in shacks. So the problem is quite big, considering that Romania has a population of around 19 million now, a standardized number now. So the question is also very, very deep and very serious. And the distribution of these small ghettos is sort of homogeneous around the country. You basically cannot find a single city that is not that doesn't have at least one slum or ghetto inside or around it. Then another big issue is that of invisibility, racist-based things. So they are invisibilized. Then you have an internal diversity that makes the problem of intervention quite difficult. First, you have to understand what you have there. You don't have a single phenomena. You don't have a single type. It's the internal diversity is absolutely astonishing and significant. Then we have these people from Eastern Europe moving towards Western Europe and living in various conditions. Here we are in Naples, Scampia, Secondigliano, a quite famous place, Secondigliano, for social unrest and drug trafficking and all the wrong things. However, this is an oasis created by some Bosniak Roma, and they are just rehearsing Aristophanes' birds under the guidance of some very nice Italian actors. That also raises a question of our position as people who would like to intervene in poverty areas. What are we supposed to do? If you're a theater director, you just go there, you do some participatory interventions, and you will have a theatrical representation. The end of your intervention is within reach. It doesn't raise this very big moral and technical issues, though it does. So it's not easy to do it. I wouldn't say it's easy. But comparing to the relocation of 600 people in proper housing, that's like nothing. Are we supposed to act like these guys, like bringing positive energy, doing small stuff just to show that it's possible to advance with our interventions? And here we have another, so we're still recapitulating a bit. We have this guy who I would like to make him famous for repairing the plan that you see on the left side of your screen, which is a standard plan designed by an architect. You have a hallway, a room, and a kitchen, and a toilet. And this guy just repaired it. He created, instead of a kitchen and a room, he created 2 rooms. The toilet is outside because there is no, there are no sanitary facilities around, so he cannot connect to sewage. So it's a really bad idea to have the bathroom inside the house. So he turned it into a kitchen, and now he has something like 3 rooms and a kitchen for his large family. This is the right way to do it. And he had to correct a plan provided by an architect, a certified architect, approved by the municipality, done in according to the law. So a professional intervention that was completely improper for his needs. Where are we heading to as a profession if we're not able to have this flexibility to intervene in that sort of environment? And we had the example of Professor Ikaputra, who showed us his intervention in Banda Aceh, I think. And he mentioned that the United Nations were asking for 18 square meters. That was the standard of the United Nations. And instead, he proposed 9 square meters because that was according to the very pressing needs to produce a number of houses with within a specific budget for a number of people. So and then the incremental production. I'll just share with you now something that Zlata Vuksanovic-Matsura, who presented yesterday her intervention, she didn't show this, but we're friends, and I have access to her materials, and I'm very keen of this solution done by Vladimir Matsura, her husband, who was also awarded a prize several years ago for an intervention that was specifically designed for a Roma community. And it's a very modest, minimalistic house which has everything inside, and trying to focus on every aspect that would improve the living conditions from a very, very low standard to the next immediate standard available, not just take people and put them in standard housing conditions, which happens in many places. And then the project, several years later, you see that the project was a failure because they cannot afford to live there. They don't have the habits and the capacity to even pay for basic utilities. Now, this is a dream for sustainability. And though it's perfectly well designed, sustainability has to be allowed to happen. So I remember it was probably 2010 when I was in Belgrade, and the project was presented, and there was a budget, and we were in the headquarters of the presidency. So we were in the presidential palace, And the prime minister arrived, and everybody was happy that something will go on. And guess what? Nothing happened because of the entanglements of bureaucracy and of the resistance of neighbors and of the hesitancy of sponsors. So we see good projects, we see good intentions, we see knowledge developing, but we don't see the political will following. Instead, we see a game of money. We're in Greece now, where these people were given 65,000 euros as a loan. This should be like elemental in Chile, like you hire a company to build this concrete structure, and then you let people fill it with whatever they do according to their needs, according to their possibilities. Sounds like communism, doesn't it? Well, on the left hand, we have according to the possibilities. So these guys were given this structure. Actually, they were obliged to spend the money, so to give it to a company that built this thing, and then the money were over, and they are still living in this shack. Already 4 or 5 years since they are living in the shack that is under this beautiful structure, while some of their neighbors managed to build this small palace with these beautiful staircases. But we see here the limits of an intervention that is based on simply on money. So first on money, and then the process was supposed to follow, like design, participatory process, whatever. They were just trying to align people on a street, giving them money and creating sometimes bigger problems that the problems that we're supposed to solve. And this happens because of this huge discrepancy in the level of housing. So what I'm portraying here, it's a very simple thing. It's on top you have the standards for minimal housing. And on the bottom 3 steps, you can see the actual situation of poverty. And I think the main idea is that we have at least 3 distinct levels of poverty that are seen more or less as a continuum when you start planning, but they're quite distinct because the lowest of them, extreme poverty, is always associated with exclusion. It's not only associated with precarity like the top of them. So precarity can be addressed by giving stuff to people, increasing income, providing housing, providing a bit of education. This is a famous integrated project, whereas discrimination needs a lot more attention and long-term policies. It's really different in terms of what you would have to do. It starts from here, from that sort of situation, where you would have here you have actually 3 houses of families that migrated from rural areas to a small city in Romania. And then you have these nice people from Bucharest, my team, trying to do participatory planning. You see a flip chart here. We were doing the consultation part. And on the left, you see the solution of the municipality, which we strongly advertise and advise them not to do that sort of thing. But the local interests were too strong to fight this. So they ended up demolishing the shacks, and not all of them. It was just a small example. They built just several of these buildings, and putting people in single-room apartments, despite the fact that our research was showing that that the average size of the family was 5.8 persons per family. And despite the fact that we did extensive research that is, always represented in this ridiculously colored, colorful way of flip charts, of pie charts, showing, for example, the fear of not being forced to move in a different place. So this place called Valea Rece is quite horrible, but they were still fearsome of being forcibly removed. Then it was their fears that they didn't want to be moved in a block of flats, in a multi-apartment building, because they knew that it's very expensive, because they knew that if you're moved together with people that are as poor as you, it will be a very noisy and miserable place, and nobody will be able to pay. And if your neighbor doesn't pay, then water is cut for the entire building, and so on and so forth. Then they were the fears were about getting ill because of the very bad conditions. Now, this, of course, raises our moral responsibility, not just technical responsibility. We do have a moral responsibility, but are we political actors? And I think we're only allowed to make hundreds of drawings like this, which are analytical or proposal drawings, trying to figure out what is proper for each and every subdivision of that sort of settlement. However, you're never allowed to go the full way, which might be in some cases a radical process of redistribution. I'm not literally arguing for a communist society, but sometimes it ends up with a Leninist twist when you have riots and people are just putting everything on fire. And that is favored by this sort of advanced marginality and an advanced process of social exclusion that leads to environments of this sort. Now, we also had on Tuesday an interesting attempt of our colleague Jacopo Gresleri, who was trying to tackle the issue of housing, disadvantaged housing areas. I would call them with an umbrella term, a more technical one, which are, of course, ghettos, slums, mahalas, Carton City, as they call them in Serbia, Kampung, you name them. There was a problem of this kinship of the informal camp, of the refugee camp, of the hyper ghetto, as Loic Vacant would name it, of the classic ghetto that was so thoroughly described in literature, and of the slum, which dominates the global South. And in a way, our situation in Romania is a combination of all these, added with this problem of having very small slums. So they're almost invisible. They're hardly visible on a national level. So what I was trying to depict in this esoteric diagrammatic way, but with a quite common Venn diagram, is the fact that if you look at the small shapes, I was trying to show that you can have the same shape of a housing area that sits in a different category. So they might look alike, but they are determined by different major determinations. It comes a bit of a difficulty of my model, which is really not that complex. But still, the major determination is poverty, of course. That's what I'm dealing with. We have at least 3 levels of poverty, which in technical terms nowadays, the current paradigm, are reduced to just 2. The major one is relative poverty, which generates a whole huge discourse on inequality. You might remember, we are the 99%, we are the 90%. And in terms of inequality, in pretty much every society, 80% of the population is poor. And it's poor in the sense that it is unequal. It's below the equality line. But the equality line is defined in a highly technical way as 60% of the median income line at a national level. So it's a fluctuating line, and this leads to a sort of constant of around in between 25 to 40% in each country. And when I say every country, I mean mostly European Union. We have a variable number and a relatively small number of people in poverty, which are officially recognized as poor. But actually, it's more like 80% of the society is not able to precisely make ends meet. That's I'm quoting here mostly French literature like Serge Paulhan and Bourdieu, and Italian literature. We have a number of studies confirming that sort of general idea about our societies. Then we have the extreme poverty, which was allocated in a symbolic and intellectual way just to Africa and third world countries, which is not true, because Europe has a lot of extreme poverty, and that is because you also have a relative line. The famous $1 per day, which is now, I think it became $1.29 or something like that. That classifies people according to their income. The fact is that you also have a lot of black economy, gray economy, non-monetary economies that helps a bit, but also hides a lot of the poverty. You just have people that are not in the system. We should also take into account severe poverty if you ever want to move forward, which is severe deprivation. So this is where you have political rights are no longer a goal of these people. In order to, they just have to survive, but they're not completely, they still have a chance to be integrated. But their only chance to be integrated is by being assisted by the rest of the society. They are in a trap. They are in the so-called poverty trap. Now, the formation of these disadvantaged housing areas also relies on housing discrimination, which I will describe later. But also on a thing that I struggled for a while to define, because I started putting here in this circle that is on the left, and now it's labeled difference. At first, that was the Roma. I was dealing with Roma population, and then I realized that there is an upper term that always can be followed, which is, of course, ethnicity, race, the first that come to your mind. But then let me stop for a while as a sharing of my screen, because I want to show you something that is not completely academic, but it's quite telling about the way I think about difference. There's a strong philosophical debate of major names in philosophy. They engage into this reflection on diversity and difference. And of course, I'm not qualified to go, and it's also an endless debate in between philosophers. But I was involved with some friends into this sort of exercise. So I got some things, and I finally summarized them in a vulgar way. So this is more like folk theory that I would like to share with you. It's not very academic, but it goes like that. So I have the problem of diversity, and diversity is closely linked to what we like to call integration and inclusion, which are not the same thing, but what are we trying to integrate? What are we trying to achieve? And this is, again, debatable. We're trying to achieve a multicultural society, don't we? Though Angela Merkel announced the end of the multiculti society, which was a tragedy on her behalf, because the multiculti society, in my opinion, is very much alive. We're just engaged in an exercise of a multiculti society. We're here, people from a number of cultures and societies quite different from one another. So diversity is what you see as my hand, my fingers are not different. Those common language, in common language we call them different. They're actually diverse. It's a finger that has 3 metatarsians, 1 nail, and they're very much alike, but they are diverse. So they're not different. When it comes to cultural difference or cultural diversity, so difference and diversity, then you have diversity that turns difference. So this is a conceptual analysis. So diversity turns into difference. This is when you use a thing that is a bit different, it's part of the diversity, and you point it out and you use it either in your favor, if you want to highlight something like identity, or against somebody. So it's something that pops up of the diversity scheme. And that's why I use difference here. It's not the fact that we are diverse. It's the thing that is highlighted and used as an argument for or against a certain group. And that, of course, combines with the problem of poverty and the problem of discrimination. So this is how I see disadvantaged housing areas. Now, I can make it more visible, more detailed, more give it a material understanding, like the conjugation of difference and discrimination, like when you take ethnicity, being Jewish and being residentially segregated, you get a historical ghetto, the Jewish ghetto in Venice or in Warsaw. This is what you get in this intersection. Then you have this fantasy, you know, you never have just one determinant. We will discuss this. So you have an ethno neighborhood, the Chinatown where you can find only Chinese, and there's no problem with that. It's just the fact that they are Chinese. They're not discriminated. They're not poor. It's just their ethnicity that pops up. So it's a touristic exercise. Then you have camps of refugees. So there is no discrimination. They're actually helped by the authorities to survive. They were discriminated, but now they're just, it's a humanitarian intervention, like, okay, you can sit here. We're welcome to receive you. That happened with the Roma that were refugees of war as a result of the Yugoslav wars in Italy, and that ended up in a bad way years later when this was institutionalized, and the refugee camp became Campo Nomadi and was surrounded with barbed wire, and they never received citizenship, and now they live in ghettos. So at first they had a higher status, that of a war refugee, and now they are the pariah of the Italian society. Then we have all this range of poverty, and what is interesting is always to realize that a ghetto will appear in a poverty neighborhood. It's very unlikely that it will appear in a rich neighborhood. So we have all these geographical and topographical relationships, which start from substandard housing to the hyper ghettos that is in the middle. And of course, you have these housing discrimination issues, like these guys are actually working. This is not a playground, but a work scene in Câmpina in Romania. And their houses are just meters away from, so I just turned around my camera and you see this housing, these houses here. There was also a power line, not what you see in the picture, but a really high voltage one, 40 kilovolts. So we have discrimination in housing, which of course has lots and lots of aspects. We're not going into this. But again, about this type of modeling of areas. Again, we're into metaphors. The fact is that you can juggle with your identity. So the difference changes in time and changes according to the agency of various actors that are involved in an exchange. So it's a bit permeable. Also, poverty, you can go in and out of poverty. It's not something fixed. Also, discrimination has its more strict rules. And if you do any historical study in urban planning, it's amazing how you can trace the ways in which people live. You can trace it hundreds of years ago. It's very, very stable. That sort of difference that ends up as a rule, as a discriminatory policy. But in real life, you have this colors mingling and changing their position, as I said. This adds a difficulty. What are we dealing with? What should we do? And then we have the things that, so I have to, we're not very far from the end, but that's the most, that's the rent part. We have the policies of addressing poverty. And here we go. There are many keywords that govern interventions in poverty areas. And there are some keywords that I would just like to add, like this, again, philosophical term of the pharmakon, comes from Plato. It gives us pharmacy today. And it points out at the double nature of the pharmakon, or the almost triple nature of the pharmakon, which means that an amount of a drug can either heal you or kill you. And it depends on the way you take it, on the way it is prescribed, on what it does at a specific point in time for a specific person. So we don't treat, you know, how doctors say, you don't treat the disease, you treat the patient. And you have at your disposition, you have these things that might be money, assets, education, housing, whatever, that are used as a pharmakon in order to provide a remedial intervention. But pharmakos also means sacrifice, which we have to remember. It was not just scapegoating. Scapegoating was when you would sacrifice a goat, of course. We just saw a goat in the United States Capitol. No, that guy might be a very good scapegoat for the entire situation. They would just have to sacrifice him, and things will just return to normal. You have the villain that is so visible, painted on his face and wearing the horns and the fur. It's very easy to identify and take a look at him and just hang him in the public square. That would be what Greeks would do. But it was, of course, human sacrifice. It's a bit debatable that they were not doing it that often, but once in a while they would kill somebody in order to revert to order, to restore the natural order. And we have to look at this poverty in alleviation or development programs as as a pharmacon, because they aim to be remedial interventions. They always point out that we will have something in the end, which is in most cases, and precisely in more often in Christian societies, it is very much about redemption. We don't do it for the poor. We're mostly doing it for ourselves, to save our souls, to go to heaven and stuff like that. So the pharmacon is a double face kind of intervention, and it says more about the person that is trying to intervene than about the issue in itself. Then it's this funny idea of acupuncture and all this mumbo jumbo pseudo medical thing like homeopathy. And acupuncture is a medical scam if you follow it closely. There's nothing like energy flowing from your magic points, though it has a fantastically high percentage of this placebo response. You might feel very good just because somebody inserted a needle in you and just cares about you and says, "Are you feeling better?" And you will start feeling better. That's fantastic about human beings, that we are empathic, and it really works in this way. It happens that my family doctor is also an acupuncture guy, and he's a fabulous guy. He's a very, very, very good doctor. So he provides you the classic medicine interventions, and then he's trying to put some needles in you, which is actually a form of psychotherapy, and he's doing it very, very well. He's brilliant. The guy is absolutely brilliant. But acupuncture in itself is a scam, and we're not going to solve any sort of urban issues by doing acupuncture. And acupuncture was a keyword in the recent years of urban planners claiming, falsely in my opinion, that if you do small interventions in the right spot, then good things will follow for the entire urban tissue. That's fake news. It just doesn't work, and definitely in poverty areas, it's never going to work. One form of it is the pilot projects, which are supposed to show an example, to be like an experiment, and then people would just take a look at them and say, "Oh, this is the way we're going to do it," and then pilot projects will just self multiply, and people will know how to do it. Problem with that is that I don't have even a single example of a successful project that naturally multiplied himself. So you need public policies that are assumed by national governments, not pilot projects promoted by NGOs that just show the right way, and then everybody will just stay in line, do the same thing, and soon enough we will have a wonderful world. The problems generated by poverty are not going to be solved with magic interventions and self-healing and psychotherapy. Then I just invented a new combination of science, this integrated project and versus interdisciplinarity. Why am I doing this bit complicated thing? Because we can see them together, and we can see them as opposite to one another. It's not that complicated. I don't know if it looks good enough, but that's the whole idea. It's again part of what I call the magic of poverty programs. Things that appear to work and they don't work because they're not scientific. Like pilot projects should work only if they are designed as experiments, which they claim to be. Like when you have a pilot project, you do a sort of intervention, an intervention of some sort, and then you evaluate it. If you evaluate it as a scientific experiment, and the evaluation is done by an independent evaluator, then you draw real conclusions, and then you promote knowledge. There's an advancement in knowledge, like in any scientific experiment. If you evaluate them internally, or you basically do not evaluate them, but just acknowledge that the parameters were achieved, were met, the targets were met, then of course it's not going to lead to any advancement in knowledge and valid policy conclusions. And one of the major things is this integrated idea, the idea of integrated projects, interdisciplinarity, which claims that we are going to work together. My own experience with working together is that the major structure of institutions, the way they are designed, favors specialization. So we live in a highly, remarkably specialized world. And any project that claims to be integrated or interdisciplinary crumbles in front of this institutional arrangement. Our contemporary institutions do not favor interdisciplinarity. You sometimes see it working in France, for example, where you have a former imperial nature of Napoleon, inspired by Napoleon, and armies of bureaucrats that are highly specialized. When you have a lot of people on the ground, they will eventually work together. I saw this in Aubervilliers, but this is not the result of their wish to have an integrated project or to work in an interdisciplinary way, which means that you use methods from a different discipline, but just of the fact that you have a very strong bureaucracy, that you have an army of people working together. This is multidisciplinary. The way to advance into interdisciplinarity is somewhere lost in the horizon. I don't think it's here yet. And I don't think we should build illusions. We shouldn't give it up, but we should better focus on what we have now, which is this institutional architecture that is against actually any sort of integrated project. Then we have the very generous idea of development. Nobody wants to plan for shrinking cities. Everybody designs metropolitan areas. Everybody is waiting for European money, for Chinese money, for young people to return to their locality. So we have this problem here in Europe. of many cities that are actually shrinking, and of communities that are shrinking, of places that are, of course, losing their qualities. And the only solutions that you see through project is development, something that will grow based on the idea, which is of a neoliberal extraction of an endless resources. It is like if you lack something, you just open it to the market. The market will provide. Markets sometimes provide, sometimes don't. And what do you do when they don't provide anything? How would we be able, because we never teach this, because we never practice this, plans to close things, to how would I call it? I don't even have a good term for not having a village anymore. I can only say demolish it, erase it, move it, or something that involves or presumes violence, a violent action against that locality. But we don't have nice plans to just let it die in decent conditions, to assist it on its exit, like assisted suicide or something like that, which is a huge moral issue, but also a technical issue. How are we going to do it? We don't really know how to do it with humans that struggle in pain. Do we know how to do it with localities? And development is now versus sustainability, but they also go together. Sustainable development, and it's was clearly demonstrated that development is never sustainable. You have to destroy something in order to develop. But now we're into this magic thinking of thinking that we can have sustainable development, and it's nice because it makes us take into account more things than just economic development. It might even make us take into account people, which would be a great thing to take into account people when you talk about development. Not just about their pockets, but about their wish to live in a decent place and have decency in their lives. The last one, so we're close to the end. It's participatory practices. So it's again part of the magic ideas of alleviating poverty. And this was again like what I have here is like a Swiss Army knife. It can have of course, even more things attached to it. And the Swiss Army knife is a very funny tool. You get a blade for cutting meat. You get a small thing to open a bottle of wine or a bottle of beer, and so on and so forth. Problem is that when you have that sort of universal tools that have sets of things inside, none of them works perfectly. So if you want to really do some cooking, you need a real knife. If you need to take out a screw, you would need a screwdriver, not your Swiss Army knife. That is going to break down. If you really have to work in your apartment or your house, you need a set of real tools, not that sort of small universal tool that has a very small hammer, a very small screwdriver, a very small knife, and a very small saw. It's useless. But we have this poverty alleviation programs and tools that look like a Swiss Army knife. you just fool around trying to cut small pieces of paper and insert minuscule screws in it in order to build a minuscule shelter. And the problem of participation is one that is very much overvalued nowadays. There's also a lot of literature showing an entire scale of participation and the whole critique, because it starts with elements of just informing people, and you call it participation. Then it's with tokenism, so you just give them small things which are irrelevant for their life, but you just give them, and this is called participation. And in order to be proper participation, they must have a seat and they must have the decision of what to do with the funds, with the money, which is quite radical, and it doesn't happen. So what sort of participation if we're always asking for it? To what extent? Are we ready to, are politicians ready to give up a significant part of their power to the people? And the answer, my personal answer is no, it's not going to work. Then we have these rights. So participation and rights are very well balanced, and they work within the same groups. People who value participation, they also argue in terms of rights. And here we just have to have a remark that housing is the most unregulated part of human rights. We do have human rights in what regards political rights, habeas corpus, the protection against even about food, but housing is not regulated. This is my last this is a summary of my contribution today. I'll just give it a quick read. So in 1998 or 7, there was an international exhibition in Bucharest, which was entitled Architects and the Eradication of Poverty. So there was no less than the eradication of poverty that was supposed to be done by architects. And one very powerful entry in that international contest was a poster that was bluntly proposing the eradication of architecture. So the total disappearance of any aesthetic associated and any sort of gratuitous things done by architecture, just in order to provide buildings for people. And this is a strong expression of our dilemma as architects, because we cannot help doing design, and design is always expensive. And we cannot help being depressed if our houses don't look good enough. And we know that nice houses have a really, really good effect on people. Second one, benchmarking is about this project management thing that plagues our interventions, that have to be measurable, evidence-based, and this always postpones or puts aside harsh moral judgments, and is sort of erasing moral standards, replacing them with development goals or something like that. So development goals are never going to help us doing the right thing for people who are excluded and persecuted. Then we have this ethnocultural focus, which tells us that a certain ethnic group or a certain population has problems because they are Roma or midgets or homosexuals or Muslims or whatever they are. And this is associated with their identity. And therefore, they need specific ways of being provided houses. I argue for the universality of housing. Then the beginning and the end of my intervention is that planning for housing poverty have to reach the complexity of rocket science if we are ever to move forward and give an answer to these sort of problems. Thank you very much for your attention and patience with a very long presentation. Thanks a lot.
Marcus has a question.
Yeah, Marcus, I have a question, Cătălin. I have a question because I heard that this commission, the Swedish member of the European Commission, was responsible for the Roma communities in Europe. And that I heard I think it was in a newspaper or somewhere, an article, interview with her, that she's very much, or she was, I don't know if it was, I think it was the old commission, that she was very much engaged in improving especially the housing conditions of the Roma communities. Have you heard or have you seen any improvement under this last period of the commission?
I saw a more favorable attitude. But of course, this has to do with the general housing policies of the Commission, which until 7-8 years ago, they were against any form of social housing. So as a result of the lobby of some of the people that I actually know, people from Hungary and Austria, that was slowly changed. So now European programs allow the building of social housing and repairings of housing. So it is the main duty stays within upper levels of the European Commission. So you might have as a responsible for a group of people, you might have a political goal to improve the housing conditions, but it has to be approved by DG Regio. And DG Regio, until quite recent, just wouldn't give money for social housing. They would give money for urban regeneration, you know, doing nice things in brownfields and historical parts of the city and stuff like that. Now we have a bit of this, but it has to reach, again, because of the subsidiarity principle, it has to reach municipalities. And for example, Romanian municipalities are completely against building any sort of social housing. We are the perfect opposite of Austria. Austria is our, you know, you live in a social housing paradise in Austria. I'm fascinated by Austria, and I'm always keen to hear. And we look in awe at Austria, from a country that has 98.5 private ownership, which I think it's terrible. We look at this. So no improvement in Romania, maybe in some other places. Let's go for the question. This is, what is your opinion on construction workshops for people in need of housing solutions? Somehow based on Hundertwasser's quote, that says only when architect, bricklayer, and tenant are a unity or one and the same person can we speak of architecture. Everything else is not architecture, but a criminal act which has taken on form. Yeah, that's a very nice saying from Hundertwasser. I was not aware of it. I have a special connection with Hundertwasser. He had an exhibition when I was a teenager. There was this retrospective in Bucharest, and I think that exhibition influenced me a lot to see that hippie guy. I also did that sort of thing, architect, bricklayer, and tenant, in my own house and with some experiments with friends, and it was fantastic. I think it's a great thing. The only if we are to link it with a problem of poverty is that it only works on a very, very small scale. So I see poverty as a public issue and as an issue that has to be solved on a very large scale. And when you have large scale, then the bricklayer and the architect and the tenant and whatever other actors there are, as I said, because of this institutional architecture, they're highly specialized in what they do. And then you have to speak about mass production. I think we are facing the problem of mass production, and just you just have to remember that at the beginning of the 19th century, of the 20th century, so in 1900s, we were 1.5 billion people, and now we are close to 8 billion. So here and there you might have beautiful, amazing pieces of architecture and gestures of architecture done by these nice communities. But the problem of poverty is one that is systematic and really huge scale, really large scale. Romania is an example of a small scale. Just think India or Indonesia with its 260 million inhabitants. But thank you for your question. It's really nice. Then we have Christian. So he wants to hear my opinion on the type of funding needed to build houses for the poor. Low interest or no interest public funding institutions. I think that we must have all of the forms of funding and all of the forms of houses. I think the only way to create a certain mobility and to provide opportunities for people to find their solution is to have the most achievable diversity possible. Subventions, concessions, social housing, emergency shelters, self-build, whatever. You will have a group of people that will find their solution in that particular form that you foster, that you promote. So I'm in favor of actually multitude of policies, because I was arguing for national level policies, but all those policies should be a composition, a salad bowl, a mixture of things. If we are to get solutions, there's no single solution. Must have hundreds of attempts of different sorts. And here we'll of course, they might be regulated by this idea of the invisible hand. Maybe the invisible hand will show which are good and which are not. Then we have Lars. Hello, Lars. So I was indeed tackling or being very unhappy with contemporary housing standards, and the idea is that they are doomed to fail because they are not properly designed. And you wonder if this could be solved by public subventions. Well, that's a welfare state. And we have the remains of the welfare state in Northern Europe, where you come from. We have also leftovers in the UK and in Germany, and we have local municipalities that are doing it. Berlin is a great case of red coalition. Parts of Spain, parts of Greece. But you need a welfare state. You need a welfare policy in order to do that. Unfortunately, in the case of Romania, the idea of the welfare state is somehow forbidden. It's you would be instantly accused of being a communist if you just raise the question. Whenever I was saying social housing in the 90s, people were saying social means socialism, and we got rid of socialism. We don't want to see socialism anymore. So we're leaning on the right side with accents of extreme right. That was it.
That was it. Oh, please.
We have Zlata, but we can hardly hear her.
Sorry, I have some problem with microphone and camera. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you have to go very close to your camera.
Yes, yes. So, Cătălin, thank you for the presentation. It was really inspiring.
Zlata, we cannot hear you anymore. Maybe you can write your question in the chat, Zlata?
Okay. Well, it was nice to hear her, at least a bit.
Okay, there is another question from Francisco.
Okay. Any sort of thoughts on natural construction? I have experience with adobe, mud, earthen architecture, but bamboo is not very popular in Romania. We have reed, but not for we had reed roofs on our earth constructions. I can share with you. Just contact me and we can talk on this. Well, natural constructions are natural materials are just great. If you look in behind me, there is a brown wall that is raw earth. So I think raw earth can be used as a finishing material in contemporary dwellings in cities. It's a very nice, warm, beautiful materials that sits very well on the walls in a contemporary apartment. So yes, natural construction materials are to come back in our life. I hope so. It also provides very cheap. These earth constructions are fantastic. They're very good quality. I'm my experience with cob construction just encouraged me to promote them, you know, without hesitation. They're fantastic buildings, and I don't know if we are going to save the earth by building in adobe, but it certainly would help poverty communities especially in rural areas, of course. And we have to acknowledge the fact that half of the world population lives in adobe buildings. Oh, so Zlata asked me because I was critical about many keywords. So she wants a positive one, the ones that really would help us. So she's pushing me to be radical in a different way. Well, I love redistribution. I think redistribution is actually missing, and that we have a quite rich built environment that is not used properly. There are many places that are just not used and that might be used, just given to the poor. Then we would have a better world. If we don't have so many abandoned houses or people living in huge houses where they have lots of rooms that they never use. But of course, this is communism.
Okay, thank you for the time, Professor Nariman. That's really interesting about some point, but I will ask the Roma community. I still interested with Roma community. I just read some information on the internet, some search, but that's not a good stereotype with the Roma community. And when the municipality built or do the development to that community, but the people still get the same stereotype how they can survive in social or economic life in there. Because I don't know how to maybe you can tell me to give the good stereotype or the diversity that you have mentioned before, but how can we consider people to, that's diversity, that's the cultural, how to change the people stereotype like that. Thank you.
Well, that's a bit technical or a bit specific, and I have to say that I was also following yesterday when you asked Zlata about also the Roma. Why are they so much hated? And you can, of course, you have to look at the majority. It's a problem of the majority. The majority is racist. So the short answer is that we live in a racist society. And your question is basically, how do we get rid of racism? Which I don't have an answer for such a big question. I don't know how we get rid of racism. We're just doing our best, trying not to be racist and raising our children in a way that they will never be racist. And just looking at how these people are so much affected by racism and taking their side. Otherwise, I don't have a, I mean, it's just technicalities. How do you do it? What's the effect here? What's the effect there? But the key word here is racism, which affects all societies, but specifically ours in relationship with the Roma. But thank you for your question. Lars says, that working with good examples, so the good examples are not followed, and he wonders why is it not working when it comes to fighting poverty. Well, it's because they are defined as good practices by the same people that invented the program, so they're not really good practices. And my argument is that when you deal with a difficult issue that has so many things that have to be considered and which has a really big size, so it's not something that can be solved. It's not a punctual thing. It's a thing that is entangled. It's connected with many others. You will never be successful with a single project. You can use your project just to tackle a small part of it, but then you shouldn't define it as a success. You should define it as an experiment, as an honest thing, and draw the conclusions. But if you're a promoter, if you're a financial, if you're the representative of a financial mechanism, if you're a political actor, you need the success. So all the good practices are based on this fake evaluation. That's why they are not working, because you cannot draw fair conclusions, balanced conclusions out of that particular experiment. It might have a very good effect, but that effect might be temporary, but they will never acknowledge that it's a temporary effect. It might have a good effect and a counter effect, and they will highlight the good effect and they will hide the counter effect, and so long and so forth. So it's a lack of honesty of this, of most interventions that is affecting this idea of good practice that would then be multiplied and reproduced and spread all over the planet. You need to be really, really honest. And when you're really, really honest with the results of a project, then the success story fades away. You cannot sell it anymore to the press. Most programs are designed in a way to be sold as a success story. And this is a problem. I think so.